Stored procedures are some of the most powerful pieces of functionality. These are database objects as well in SQL Server. And so in this video, I just want to kind of give you a 30,000-foot view of stored procedures because you're going to hear them, you're going to see them on the exam, you're going to hear them about it in the real world. And as we're just moving through these database objects, I just want you to understand roughly what these things are, but we will dig into these later on in the course, and I'll show you how to build one, how to code it up, and everything. A stored procedure is the SQL version of a subroutine. We can write a collection of lines of code. It could be 200 lines of code that do some sort of complex action. They check to make sure a customer has the appropriate credit available with us. We check to make sure that the customer lives in the appropriate state, has the appropriate credentials or whatever, and does whatever we need it to do. And then it finally takes action, writes something into the database, deletes something from the database, whatever. So that's a whole collection of lines of code. It's 200 lines of code. We can give that code a name, just like we do with a subroutine, and then we can call that code. We can call the name in code, and it goes and grabs that code and executes it. It's a lot of power. Stored procedures offer a number of advantages to us in Microsoft SQL Server. Now be very careful because you will see stored procedures out there in other databases like Oracle and so forth. And stored procedures may or may not have all of these advantages that I'm going to list here. So some platforms are more friendly toward stored procedures. They're good almost everywhere, but some of the aspects of the Microsoft SQL Server is a little different. So be very careful if you're in a cross-platform environment. But first of all, a stored procedure is an object. I'm going to show you this in just a second out in the Management Studio. That means we can apply permissions to a stored procedure and we can control who can even execute the thing. So once I build the code and give it a name, I can control who can call that name and have that code run. Another thing about a stored procedure that is great is the functionality is centralized and it's consistent. Once I build a stored procedure, then I just call that thing from 200 different places in code all over the place. And if I ever need to change that stored procedure, I change it in one place and it's changed everywhere that it's called. Also, once I get it running once correctly the way I want it to, then it's always going to run that way no matter who's calling it from where. And they can pass parameters into it, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So stored procedures centralize our functionality, and they almost turn our functionalities into objects, if you will. So just kind of keep that in mind. That code's always going to run regardless of where it's called. It's always exactly the same. And this is unique to Microsoft SQL Server in some instances. With other databases, stored procedures run a lot more efficiently than do standard queries. So just keep that in mind. Now what I want to do is jump out to the Management Studio, and all I want to do is show you what a stored procedure looks like. And a little later on in the course, I'm going to show you how to build one of these, how to make it accept variables and all sorts of things. But notice if I look in my Object Explorer out in the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, you will notice that under Programmability, there is a folder of stored procedures. And these are some that came with the AdventureWorks 2012 database. And notice there, for example, there's one called USP Get Bill of Materials. Well, if I click on it and then right click and go to Properties, you can see here that this is an object. Notice it has a schema. We'll deal with schemas a little bit later on. But you can also see there's the name of it. It's not a system object. You execute it as whoever calls it. There's all kind of information there. But here's the big one, permissions. We can set permissions on who can execute this stored procedure and who cannot execute it. So we can control who uses this thing. But also, if I right-click and choose Modify here, I can actually see what that stored procedure looks like. Now I'm going to unpin this so it goes away and it's a little bit cleaner to see. But this is the code that will run when you call this stored procedure called USP Get Bill of Materials. All right. And so here's all the code. Now I don't have to tell you that you can learn a lot about writing your Transact SQL code by looking at some of other people's stored procedures. Especially you can go look at some of the Microsoft stored procedures that are right here in these system stored procedures. Now, if I execute that or expand that, I can see all kinds of things. Notice I'm going to right click this and act as if I'm going to modify app role, and you can see how Microsoft is actually writing their stored procedures. And you can learn all kinds of things by looking through these things. But that's what a stored procedure is. It is simply a collection, a number of lines of code that I can call just like a subroutine in any other program. And I'm going to show you how to build these things a little bit later on. But for now, just kind of get your head wrapped around what a stored procedure is, why we want to use it.